welcome you to Parkland Institute's 22nd annual fall conference. Wow, that, I don't know, makes me feel good. Also makes me feel really old, to be honest. My name is Trevor Harrison. I am director of Parkland Institute, and welcome to what I think will prove to be once again a fabulous conference. I want to begin by an acknowledgement of the traditional territory that we're on. The University of Alberta, where we're gathering this weekend, is located in Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples. As we gather to look at the multiple and often competing forces that will influence Alberta and its trajectory over the next year, it is critical that all of our deliberations and discussions this weekend be grounded in the land on which we meet and the history and lives of its peoples. To that end, I would like now to invite Lewis Cardinal to come up and say a few words. Lewis Cardinal is Woodland Cree from the Sucker Creek Cree First Nation in northern Alberta. He is owner of Cardinal Strategic Communications, specializing in Indigenous education, governance, and communications, and was a founding board member of Racism Free Edmonton and of Alberta Aboriginal Arts. He is a past vice president of the John Humphrey Centre for Peace and Human Rights, founder of the Indigenous Peoples Arts and Culture Coalition, and co-chair of the Aboriginal Commission on Human Rights and Justice. A lifelong activist and advocate for Indigenous rights and reconciliation, Lewis has received the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal, the InSpear Award for Public Service, the Alberta Centennial Medal, and the Distinguished Alumni Award from MacEwan University. Thank you, Lewis. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Now you're expecting something really miraculous. First of all, I want to, one thing that wasn't mentioned in that wonderful introduction, thank you, Trevor, is my traditional name is Sipi Go Gisik, and that means blue sky, or what it formally means is the one who comes from the clear blue sky. And with that name, the elders in ceremony said that your life and the purpose of what you do is to build bridges between two worlds that don't understand each other, so that we may not meet in the center of this bridge, shake hands, and then go home, but to take the courage to travel to the other side, to see the wonders and the gifts that are there, and to take what you need back to your community and share it with your people. And that's the work that I've been doing pretty much for my entire life. The importance of acknowledging treaty is something that is relatively new in our time in this era of reconciliation. But it is an important statement. To recognize treaty isn't just to recognize the land that we're on. However, that is important because the land provides for us all sustenance, life, and livelihood. We must always remember that relationship with the land that we're on, and the traditional stewards of the land that looked after this place before the settlers came, the Cree, the Dene, the Blackfoot, the Soto, the Nakota, who made this area their traditional territories. But also to recognize that this place was also a great gathering place of Indigenous people for 10,000 years. This gathering place brought together many different nations of people who came to share, to learn, to trade, and to celebrate. Those traditions are still alive here. Treaty is more than a document or a parchment that was signed 100 and some odd years ago. It is a living relationship document. Within the Indigenous traditions of treaty, our nation has adopted you, Canadians, as our family, to grow together like brothers and sisters, to learn from each other, to share each other's knowledge and wisdom so that we can all become better. The essence of treaty is as brothers and sisters. And the golden rule there is that we do not make war on our family. That we must endeavor, whenever we see any one of our family in trouble, that we stand together to help. And when we hear Mother Earth cry in pain, it is our collective responsibility to share in its recovery and its protection. We have an awesome responsibility as treaty people to help each other as brothers and sisters, as family, but also to help the land that we're on. This treaty brings us closer together. This treaty is meant to join us in that harmony so that we can make this world a better place, not just for ourselves, but for our ancestors yet to come. Now, I want to share with you one more thing. It was something that was gathered from a Hopi elder in Arizona during a solstice gathering. And I think it really speaks to the nature, the spirit of this gathering, the spirit of the conference. And it starts like this. There is a river flowing now, very fast. It is so great and swift that there are those who will be afraid. They will try to hold on to the shore. They will feel they are being torn apart and suffer greatly. Know that the river has its destination. The elders say, we must push off into the middle of the river, keep our eyes open and our heads above the water, see who is in there with us, and celebrate. At this time in history, we are to take nothing personally, least of all ourselves. The moment that we do that, our spiritual growth comes to a halt. The time of the lone wolf is over. Gather yourselves. Banish the word struggle from your attitude and vocabulary. All that we do now, we must be done in a sacred way and in celebration. We are the ones that we've been waiting for. Hi. Have a good conference.
Words that I hope will stay with all of us throughout the rest of this conference and afterwards as well. Well, I know you've all come to listen to Lynne Fernandez. Certainly you didn't come here to listen to me. You've heard enough of me over the years, I suspect. That happy moment will be coming soon enough, but first I want to need to thank a number of sponsors that we have and other people who have been involved in putting this conference together. Our sponsors, the Alberta Federation of Labour, Athabasca University, the Canadian Union of Public Employees, Civic Service Union Local 52, the Health Sciences Association of Alberta, Non-Academic Staff Association at the University of Alberta, the United Nurses of Alberta, University of Alberta's Faculty of Arts, and the Wordsworth Irvine Socialist Fellowship Endowment. I also want to thank our media sponsors for the generous support that we've received. Alberta Views Magazine, CJSR Radio Edmonton, and finally, and I can't pass this by without some comment, View Weekly, who many of you may know has just been told it's going to be actually shutting down, which is a profound loss to democracy, to media, to all Albertans, and I think Canadians. But again, we're extremely grateful for all of the support from these media operations over the years. Most importantly, thanks to the many volunteers who are helping to make this conference happen. Parkland really can't thank all of the volunteers and all of the supporters and institutions too much. I next want to also thank and introduce, or I'd love to introduce, Leslie Cormack, Dean of Arts at the U of A. Leslie Cormack has been Dean of Arts at the U of A since 2010. She was previously Dean of Arts and Social Sciences at Simon Fraser University, and prior to that, she spent 17 years at the U of A as professor in the Department of History and Classics. She's been a strong supporter and ally of the Parkland Institute, and we are grateful for her leadership and support. And again, I would love to be able to introduce her to you this evening, but unfortunately she had another commitment, and so she has very kindly, though, sent on the speaking notes, and so what I will do is read verbatim from what she was going to say to us this evening. It's a great pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Faculty of Arts to the Parkland Institute's 22nd Fall Conference. Every year, the Parkland Institute organizes this conference of thought-provoking speakers and informed debate, and the amazing program you've lined up for this weekend will most certainly continue in this tradition. These are uncertain times, and we are entering into a period of even greater uncertainty. We can be assured of one thing: our political landscape will be tumultuous and divisive, and profound change in some fashion awaits us all. As President Turpin said in his recent State of the University address, whether we are speaking at the provincial or the federal level, whether we are talking to our neighbors or our families, those of us who work in universities must be keenly aware that we cannot take the public support we enjoy for granted. So how do we make the case that continued investment in knowledge and learning makes sense in a 21st century Alberta? That it is, in fact, an investment in the public good. We can start by being good citizens, by being positively engaged in the creation of a future that is inclusive, diverse, equitable, environmentally sound, and one where ideas flourish and society progresses. The topic of today's conference, Alberta 2019 Forces of Change, couldn't be timelier or more critical to our understanding of the fundamental challenges we are facing here in Alberta, in Canada, and around the world. Thankfully, we have the best minds at work here in the Parkland Institute and in the Faculty of Arts. Through its events, publications, and media reports, Parkland is a good public citizen, providing government, academics, and the general public with the information they need to make responsible and informed decisions as they wade through the quagmires of the 21st century. Indeed, the Parkland Institute has been a source of great pride for the Faculty of Arts over the past 22 years, for the high-quality research it consistently produces, and for the way in which it engages with the public and enables the informed debate that democracies require. The many people who are involved as members, donors, researchers, or board members who attend events as all of you have done tonight are a testament to the value people place on Parkland's critical role in enriching the public discourse in Alberta and beyond. I think part of the reason that this institute has become so well respected and influential in both political and non-political circles is because it is not just an academic body. It is collaborative and interdisciplinary, welcoming the input and participation of students, community leaders, and business representatives in an unwavering effort to bring critical thinking to public policy discourse in this province. In 2016, the University of Alberta's Board of Governors unanimously approved For the Public Good as the new Alberta Institutional Strategic Plan. For the public good. Think about it. The Parkland Institute is the very embodiment of this mandate. Without question, we are all better informed and more engaged citizens because of Parkland's dedication to democratic debate in this country. I would like to thank Trevor Harrison and the team at the Institute for their diligence in making this weekend possible. And of course, also a big thank you to the volunteers who will be ensuring everything runs smoothly. Finally, to any Parkland donors in attendance tonight, I would like to offer you my gratitude. It is because of you that the Institute can continue its important work. And I can only say again what a fabulously supportive institution the University of Alberta has been, the Faculty of Arts, and very much Dr. Leslie Cormack for her continued and profound support of this institute. So thank you. Well, once again, we're getting very close to Lynne being able to speak for you, to you this evening. I just want to make you knew it would come, the pitch. We really can't do anything that we do without public support. Emotional support, support in terms of ideas, support in terms of the research we should be covering, and very much financial support. Many of you may actually know or not know, we actually have we are probably one of the smallest funded institutes in all of North America, and yet we've been through 2 reviews over the last number of years. The last one was 2 years ago. And at that time, the reviewers came back and said, you know, Parkland Institute punches way above its weight. It produces more reports, more presentations, more workshops, the conference, more blogs, more op-eds, more everything per person, per amount of funding than any other institute, not just in Canada, but in the United States. We are so far above the Fraser Institute, to pick one of them. So we've been able to do a lot of things. I just went to our website last night, and please go there, because all of our publications, everything we do is open and accessible to the public, right? So we put everything out there free. I went up there just to look at, and because after a time, you know, I'm getting older, I forget things. I couldn't remember how much we had been doing over the last year. I found 7 reports up there. It's been a fabulous year. And then you start to add on again the blogs and the op-eds and everything else that we've been doing. It's amazing for a staff that is as small, but I have to say incredibly capable as it is. And we could do that much more again if we had that much more support. So I'd ask you to consider that tonight. It's wonderful that you're here. Talk to your friends. Give us all the best publicity you can. And onwards and upwards from there, because we can't rest on our laurels. There's still fights to be won here. So, finally, we come to that moment. No, actually, there's more things I have to do here. Yeah. Even when you give me a program, I can't follow it. Okay. For those of you who have not registered for the conference but are interested in coming to individual sessions, tickets will be available at the door. You can still register for the full conference, and we'll even take the price of your ticket for tonight's session off the cost of your full registration. If you have any questions about the conference, please ask one of our volunteers. If they can't find the answer to your question, they should be able to point you in the direction of someone who can, and that's most likely either Gail or Ricardo. Okay, my introduction finally for Lynne Fernandez, our speaker of the evening. Lynne Fernandez is Research Associate and Project Coordinator for the Manitoba Office of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, where she currently holds the Errol Black Chair in Labour Issues. Lynne has a Master's in Economics from the University of Manitoba, where she discovered that the so-called dreary science could actually be very interesting. She has a particular fondness for labor and environmental issues, as well as community economic development, government policy, and economic history. Parkland Institute benefits tremendously from our close working relationship with CCPA and its various provincial offices, and we're thrilled to have Lynne here with us tonight to share her insights on the growing trend toward hard right politics around Canada and the world, and its potential impact for Alberta. So please welcome with me Lynne Fernandez.
Thank you. Thank you, Trevor. Am I on? Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much. It's really nice to be here in Edmonton. It's a city that I have neglected for most of my life, and that's because I'm from Calgary. And for some reason, if you're from Calgary, you can't come to Edmonton, and if you're from Edmonton, you can't go to Calgary. It's just this very weird Alberta thing. But I live in Winnipeg now, and so I can come to Edmonton whenever I want. And it looks like a really nice city. Everyone says it's a lot like Winnipeg, except with better infrastructure. And I just am going to say this one more time. It's warmer in Winnipeg than it is here. So I just want to get that out. I want to thank Trevor for inviting me to kick off your conference. It's a great honor to be amongst you. I have long admired Parkland's intrepidness in speaking truth to power. Not always an easy thing to do, especially in this province. Ian and Ricardo, I follow your research, use your research a lot. Gordon Laxer's here. I'm thrilled he's here. Gordon, I'm constantly looking at your stuff, especially around tar sands. And years ago, even I used Diana Gibson's excellent research on corporatization of public assets. And we were facing corporatization of our water utility in Winnipeg, and I needed to understand the nature of the threat and what to do about it. And Diana's research was invaluable to me, and we did push back successfully. So I owe a debt of gratitude to all the research that's done here, and I use it a lot, and I'm thrilled that we have got this lovely working relationship with CCPA. I want to thank Gail for getting me here, for being so incredibly efficient, and also helping me frame the parameters of my talk. So my task, as I understand it, is to set the stage for the weekend, for the rest of the conference. And I'm going to be providing a pretty high-level talk that I hope other speakers will give other speakers a platform for the issues that they're going to be drilling down into greater detail for Alberta. I will, of course, inevitably miss things that I should be talking about because just as a matter of time, I'm not talking probably as much as I should about free trade, for example, kind of skipping over that. But that's a bit in a holding pattern right now with after the midterm elections. It's not really clear what's going to happen with China or what's going to happen with the new free trade agreement with Mexico and the United States. I think that the idea of Alberta being in the eye of the storm is useful. We live in this very privileged country. You're in a very privileged province, and often I get the impression that the really bad stuff that's happening around the world is not impacting us directly. I mean, every now and then stuff sneaks in and smacks us, but for the most part, we're not doing nearly as badly as other parts of the world are. But of course, there's always that possibility that the eye of the storm is going to move on and sort of threaten to pull us into the maelstrom. And I do think it would be foolish of me to try to predict exactly what's going to happen, but I think we are in for some rough times. And there's no reason to think that Alberta won't be affected. Now, maybe I've been out of the province too long and I don't understand this new Alberta, but the idea that Jason Kenney is going to be your premier next year seems likely to me. Hopefully I'm wrong, but I'm saying this based on what's happening in the rest of the world. I think what's happening in the rest of Canada and the fact that in this election year, the right here in Alberta is not split the way it was last time. So I just want to make sure that my thing is working here. No, it's not on. Sorry, I should have checked. Did it work? Oh, great. Okay. So I'm going to be, as I said, we're talking about these gathering forces, and the way I've sort of organized the talk is to talk about two major disruptors. The first one being income inequality, and I can't talk about income inequality without talking about the financial crisis. I'm obsessed with the financial crisis for some reason, so I'm sorry, you're going to have to bear with me on that. And also a bit about climate change. I'm not going to talk too much about that because I can't tell you anything probably you don't already know. And then I want to talk about how these things are leading into sort of mass migration that we're seeing around the world and how attitudes towards immigration are heating up. And I think leading to this hard turn in politics that we're seeing certainly in the States and Europe. And then eventually how that is affecting Canada, the rise in provincial conservatism, I think that we're seeing across the country. And because I'm in Alberta, I have to talk about the politics of climate change and pipelines, of course. So at the end, I think we'll kind of contemplate about what all this might mean for Alberta. So I'm going to move on and get it right into the inequality part. And I'm going to show you some data that come from a new report out called the World Inequality Report 2018. It was put together by a long list of eminent researchers, including Thomas Piketty and Emmanuel Saez. And the first graph I'm going to show you shows how, going across various countries and regions in the world, how income inequality is split between the top 10%. So what share of national income goes to the richest 10% in a variety of countries? And this is what it looks like. If you look on, I always get mixed up here, yeah, on the right, Europe, of course, is the least unequal, 37% of national income goes to the top 10%. And then if you go to the middle of the bar graph, you'll see that dark blue, US and Canada, 47% of national income goes to the top 10%. And then by the time you get over here, you've got the Middle East, where fully 61% of national income goes to 10% of the population. So as you can see, income inequality is an issue across the globe. The next two graphs I'm going to show you are also from the same report, and they contrast the US versus Europe. And we're going to see two very different trajectories here. The first one is Western Europe, and once again, we're going to be looking at the share of national income. In this instance, we're going to look at the share of national income that goes to the bottom 50% versus the share that goes to the top 1%. And this is what it looks like in Western Europe. And as you can see, we're going from 1980 to about 2016. And the top blue line represents the share of income that's going to the bottom 50%. And as you can see, it's dipped down a little bit from 1980, but it's pretty level at about 22%. Then the bottom red line represents the richest 1% in Western Europe. They're up and down a little more. It's been going up, but it does end up at 2016. They're at about 12% of national income. So what's significant here is that the bottom 50% has more than the top 1%. And you might say, well, duh, that's actually obviously the way it's supposed to be. But the thing that gets shocking is when you look at the US, which they point out is the most unequal of the developed countries. You get a completely different story when you look at what's happening in the US. And there's been a flip, right? And that flip occurred, we can see exactly when it happened. It happened around, say, about 1996. And the top 1%, it's starting in 1980, their share of national income has skyrocketed, and they're up around 20% now. So they're not that much different from where the bottom 50% is for Europe. And then the bottom 50%, as you can see, it's plummeted since 1980. So at about 2016, they were around the same amount as the top 1% in Europe. So you've got a complete flip here from what you see in Europe. And this is going to be worse now since Trump's major tax cuts that we saw, earlier this year. So this is not even really representing how bad things are probably today. To look at Canada, this particular report doesn't have this data carved out just for Canada. So to give you an idea, it's a different study, but it'll kind of give us an idea of what's happening in Canada. This is from our national office. David McDonald put together a report looking at the wealthiest 87 Canadians, and he added up how much wealth they had, and then he said how many Canadians income would it take to equal the top 87, and this is what he found. And as you can see, in 1999, the wealthiest 87 had $125 billion. By 2016, that more than doubles to $259 billion. And it would take the income of 12 million Canadians to equal how much the wealthy 87 had. So as stunning as this is, it's still not as bad as the States. But you've got this ratio here of sort of 87 to 12 million. So unemployment clearly an issue inequality clearly an issue as well in Canada. I couldn't find really up-to-date information on Alberta, but I know from the Parkland website that the most unequal province in Canada, is that still the case? Alberta, yeah. So, and one report I read said that it was worse than the United States. I don't know if that's true or if, and that was back in 2015, so maybe things have changed. So Alberta, despite being the richest province in the country, right, your GDP per capita is about 77,000. For the rest of the country, it's 53, I think. So you're way above the rest of the country, but yet you're more unequal. For me, it's not enough just to describe what inequality looks like. I need to understand why it's that way. And the experts will agree income inequality is caused by a sort of a combination of things. And the first one I want to talk about, of course, is the decline in unionism that we've seen around the world. And this, of course, leads to stagnant wages, and it leads to increasing precarity in the labor market. And it also leads to a decline in both industrial and electoral democracy. And this is important because studies have shown that unionized workers are less susceptible to that toxic narrative that's coming out of the popular right? Less susceptible to people like Trump, less susceptible to what's come, the sort of fascist stuff that you're hearing in Europe. And Andrew Jackson here in Canada also looked at data, polling data after the election in Ontario, and he found that low-wage, non-unionized workers were more likely to vote for Ford than unionized workers. But within unionized workers, interestingly, private union or private sector unionized workers were more likely to vote for Ford than the public sector. So there's some interesting findings there and stuff that we have to keep in mind. And of course, when we look at union density in Canada, we know it's come down over the last 30, 40 years. It used to be over 40%. And Alberta has the lowest rates of unionization in the country. I know you all know this. And if it's just the private sector, it's around 10%, right? But you still have high levels in the public sector. So of course, that's a good thing. But it's an issue certainly across the country. Sorry. The other big reason that we have so much inequality is changes to our tax system. And this is a quote from Thomas Piketty from his Capital in the 21st Century. The resurgence of inequality after 1980 is due largely to the political shifts of the past several decades, especially in regard to taxation and finance. And of course, 1980 also, we can think of that as sort of the advent of neoliberalism, that movement that's pushing for small government and low taxation and free markets and going after unions and workers. And that has, of course, been unfolding now for the last sort of 30, 40 years, and we've seen definitely an attack on middle class since then. There have been two fundamental shifts in taxation in Canada since the 1990s, and the first one is from business to families through large reductions of corporate income taxes and a proliferation of business subsidies and tax credits. This is only going to get worse. There's the corporate sector in Canada is complaining because of the tax cuts in the United States, and they're saying we can't compete with the United States and we're going to have to match Trump's tax cuts up here. So this is very worrisome. The other shift has been from higher to middle and modest income families through personal income tax cuts at the high end and on increased reliance on regressive taxes. I know you've had your experiment here with a flat tax, so you know all about regressive taxation, certainly in this province. The other thing that it probably even makes has more of an impact than these two things are offshore tax havens. which are sort of all over the world, including this lovely island, which is Jersey and the Channel Islands. And Alain Dignon, an intellectual from Quebec, has talked about how there's at least $21 trillion in tax havens. And that's equivalent to the GDP of the United States and Japan put together. And that's just financial assets, right? That's not including your art collection and your fine wines and your yacht. So this takes such a hit on the public purse. And it explains why we can't have properly funded healthcare, properly funded public services. And I think there's been an estimate that there's about $10 billion a year leaves Canada to go to tax havens. So I think this describes how, from the 1980s until now, we've had this attack on the middle class, the great convergence, as Krugman calls it, where you got rid of these big gaps in income, has turned into the great divergence, and we're losing the middle class, and the middle class has sort of been on its knees, and if that wasn't hard enough, then 2008 comes and we have the financial crisis. I'm going to put up a slide and just give everybody a couple of 30 seconds or so to read it. This is from The Guardian last year, and it describes, it sort of take us back to 2008, 10 years, right? We have a 10-year anniversary now. Take you back 10 years and remind you what it was that we were facing when the crisis started unfolding. I'll just give you a minute to read this. Is everyone able to read it okay? Should I read? Does anybody need me to read it out? Okay, so it was terrifying, right? You had people like Paul Krugman saying this is going to be worse than 1929. This is going to be worse than the Great Depression, and it was an apt reference because back after the Depression and the 1929 crash, governments around the world put in financial regulations and legislation to ensure that the crash wouldn't happen again. And that legislation held us in good stead for many decades. The problem is that almost as soon as it came in, the financial sector was lobbying to get rid of it. So decade after decade, they were lobbying against it. It was weakening, it was weakening. By 1999, some of the most important legislation in the United States is gone. And we have now this Wild West in the financial sector. It's come back again. And we are beginning to hear of these strange things that no one's ever heard of before, mortgage-backed securities and subprime mortgages and hedge funds and algorithms, and nobody's really understanding what's going on. And pretty soon there's some cracks in the system, and by October 2008, Lehman Brothers starts collapsing and the panic starts coming in, and you get this scenario starting to unfold in the financial sector. And as these dominoes are coming down and it's getting close to the world economy, that nightmare scenario that The Guardian described is about to happen, right? So it is absolutely terrifying. And something has to be done, of course. So in the US, and some of you may remember Alan Greenspan from the Federal Reserve. What did they call him? At one point he was the Oracle or something. I don't know. He's the smartest guy on the planet or something like that. And he said that all of the intellectual edifice of the free market, of rational expectations and perfect markets has collapsed. And when he was asked what went wrong and what needed to be done, he sort of looked like a deer in the headlights. And he said, I don't know. I don't understand. I don't know what happened. But something had to be done. So we had Hank Paulson, and I read recently that Hank Paulson was literally on his knees in Congress asking for this bailout. And Ben Bernanke, they needed $700 billion to bail out the banks. Remember, everything was like too big to fail. Even up into 2009, Obama was still pumping fiscal stimulus through. The feds were implementing this quantitative easing, printing money, buying vast quantities of bonds, and all of this was happening to prevent that nightmare scenario from taking place. And so for the most part, it more or less worked. At least it worked for rich people. The moves protected rich people's assets. The problem is it did nothing to improve wages and incomes for the regular American, right? So you had this, as I said, middle class that was already on its knees, and by now it's sort of getting kicked in the teeth. And it's their money that's bailing out the banks, right? And this is when we get the 99% versus the 1%. This is when we get Occupy. And people are really suffering. As you can remember, hundreds of thousands lose their homes, they lose their jobs. It's gruesome in the United States. In Canada, our stricter banking and financial regulations meant that our financial sector was relatively unscathed. But there was stuff that had to be done. CMHC, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, did buy some mortgage-backed securities to get some liquidity into the banks and kind of stabilize it. But we came through, we were the poster child of how to run a financial sector. And it was because for whatever reason, our financial sector was not successful. It was lobbying to get rid of regulation, and for whatever reason, we managed to hang on to our regulations, despite the fact that we had so much neoliberal kind of pushing in here as well. But of course, the recession hit, and Alberta, I'm sure you all remember, in 5 months, the price of oil goes from $144 a barrel down to just under $34 a barrel. And you've got a deep recession here. We have a deep recession also a fairly deep recession in Ontario. Tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people lose their manufacturing jobs in Ontario. So the recession does certainly affect Canada. This is just a bit of an aside because the rest of the country starts getting out of the recession, but another one hits here. The price of oil collapses again in 2015 for different reasons. You've really got to get off the oil, guys, I got to tell you. But the recovery may be now in process, but then over the last couple of days, there's been other news coming out of the oil sector makes you wonder. But your unemployment rate is high. It's still very high. Todd Hirsch from the Treasury branch says there is now fewer oil sector jobs because the sector has sort of restructured, with all the recessions and everything. So you're probably not going to get back as many oil sector jobs. And he thinks employment is growing in other sectors, so hopefully that means there's some diversification happening, maybe, I don't know. So that's kind of what's happening in Alberta right now, but it's almost changing under our feet because I understand now that there's this profitability issue coming up. But yet, Ian, you've done some great research on the Big Five. Still highly profitable, but not paying any royalty. What's that? Yeah, there you go. Back to the crisis, though. In Europe, the financial crisis hit really hard there. And this is important because it leads up to something else. It really hits in what they called the pigs countries, Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. And it hits these countries in various ways, but for the most part, all of their banking, the private banking sector in these countries are really hit hard because, of course, with globalization, there's all this contamination from around the world in the banking sector. And that, once again, that nightmare scenario that The Guardian described is really close to happening in these countries. So these governments have to bail their banks out. Once again, just as the Americans did, they take hundreds of billions of euros from private citizens, from citizens' tax money, and they prop up these private banks. The problem is that these countries couldn't quite sustain the debt that they then went into. Greece in particular had already had a lot of debt. Spain, by the way, had been running surpluses before the recession, and it put them deeply into debt. So the European Union had to bail them out. And they pumped hundreds of billions of euros into these countries to help them. But they said, in order to do that, we are going to extract a very high price. We're going to help you, but we're going to take our pound of flesh. and our pound of flesh ends up being called this thing that we now refer to as austerity. And this is what austerity looks like in these countries. We have extremely deep cuts in public spending. Greece, for example, its real healthcare spending is reduced by 40%. Throughout the PIGS countries, they increase the retirement age. It's harder to qualify for disability benefits. So it's the vulnerable people, the most vulnerable, who are hit the hardest and hit first. Unemployment and poverty skyrocket. Unemployment in Spain at the height of the crisis was 25%. So we're talking depression levels of unemployment. And there's a push for privatization. The European Union is telling these governments to sell off their public assets as much as possible. And of course, there's a push for labor market deregulation, which means let's get rid of your unions, get people on contract as much as possible. Spain, which is a country I know well, I spend quite a bit of time there. The norm was a 6-month contract in Spain that then got to a 3-month contract. And if you were making 600 euros a month, you were doing okay. But massive amounts of unemployment. And it really hit youth hard in these countries, which was doubly tragic. But these are current unemployment rates for youth in Europe, so they still haven't recovered. 43% in Greece, almost 34% in Spain. Italy, almost 32%, and Portugal, just over 20%. Ireland is the only one that seems to be doing better. They're at about 12%. But the tragedy here is that you have now thousands of youth leaving these countries. And the ones that are leaving are the well-educated professionals, and it's not clear whether they're going to come back. These are aging populations in these countries, and who is going to provide the labor for these countries going forward, and who's going to pay the taxes and pay the pensions for the people who are left? I think unemployment now in Spain has gone down to about 17%, but it's, that's still crazy high compared to what we have here. So on the 10th anniversary of the financial crisis, there's been a lot said recently because it is the 10th anniversary, and this is from the New Yorker magazine, that talking about how in the US and Europe that the long-term cost of the crisis and the Great Recession has been huge. We've seen a decade of lagging GDP growth, wages, capital investment, and productivity. And this has affected the average person, of course, tremendously. But I think it gets even worse. This economic historian from Columbia University, Adam Tooze, this is a quote of his, talks about the disruption of the world order. The financial and economic crisis morphed between 2013 and 2017 into a comprehensive political and geopolitical crisis of the post-Cold War order. So society overall had been very much weakened by 4 decades of neoliberalism. When the financial crisis hit, you have this tectonic shift. And it's left us in a world that we don't really quite understand, at least I don't, a world where, you can have a Donald Trump as president of the United States and where you have seemingly the rise of fascism, some people worry, in Europe. So I think there's been a noted decline in democracy. The state of U.S. democracy was downgraded by a watchdog group that looks at these things. The life expectancy in the United States has declined. That's the first time that's happened in a developed country. But I heard some people, or one researcher is worried that it's soon going to happen in Canada as well. We have, of course, seen democracy disintegrating in Poland, Brazil. I mean, we can think of many other countries where this is happening too, but these are just a few that I'm mentioning. I would argue that we have seen democracy slipping in Ontario as well, as Ford uses the notwithstanding clause to sort of get his own way. So these are obviously very concerning things that are happening. There's also, I think people are just going to We talked about this. This is so depressing. I don't stop already. I will get to a point where I talk about good stuff. Okay, so don't start reaching for your antidepressants yet. But there is potentially a new crisis on the horizon, and banks are highly indebted and interconnected, and that re-regulation of the banking sector that should have taken place has not taken place. Obama started it, but Trump has pulled it back, and Obama was just tweaking, and we still have this very globally interconnected banking system, so there's the risk of contagion. Over the last 10 years, outstanding corporate debt has tripled. We could also talk about household debt, right? The household debt to income ratio in Canada is 170%. That's a big worry because interest rates are going to start going up. In the US, almost 2/3 of non-financial debt is rated as junk or just one notch better, and that becomes a concern because around $3 trillion of this debt will mature in the next 5 years, and that will be dangerous as if interest rates go up too much. So we're still on really shaky ground when it comes to the economy, and it's not clear whether we're going to go into potentially another recession. It just doesn't get any better, I'm sorry. On top of that, if that weren't enough, we've got to talk a bit about climate change. And I can't tell you anything here that you don't already know, but let's just sort of get a placeholder here so that we remember what it is that we're dealing with. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warning that the next few years are probably the most important in our history. And we've, of course, got to keep warming from going above the 1.5 degrees, and governments and private business have to make these global changes. The problem is we don't see that happening anywhere, right? We can't even I think, begin to imagine the kind of global effort that's required, or how that gets started, because at least I don't see it happening anywhere. This is from the New Yorker magazine. The new report from the World Wildlife Fund telling us that we have wiped out 60% of all wildlife since 1970. And this is just as much a crisis for humanity as climate change because, of course, we need that web of life in order to survive as well. I wasn't quite sure where to put this fellow. This rather innocuous-looking guy is Jair Bolsonaro, who's the new president of Brazil. And he represents a threat on so many fronts, I didn't know where to insert him, but I stuck him in here with climate change because, of course, he wants to give access to the Brazilian rainforest to the loggers, to the sugar plantations, to the ranchers, and to the miners. And he's saying he's also going to kick all the indigenous people out of the rainforest. So at a time when we're getting news such as we are from the IPCC, and you've got this guy coming along saying, let's get rid of the rainforest, it's just insanity, right? The IPCC also talks about how we can expect to see mass migration from the deterioration of climate, and so this kind of gives me the segue into the next depressing section that I want to talk about, which is migration. And this is a picture of the caravan moving up from Honduras. 258 million people approximately right now moving around the planet, trying to find a place to live, a decent life, a safe place to be. And there's a variety of reasons, of course, why they are moving. And the International Organization for Migration talks about how about 19 million of them are moving because they're getting away from adverse weather, from climate change. I think it's interesting to look at the various sort of events that are pushing people, because it includes the landslides and fires and drought. It also fires, does that sound familiar, right? Hurricanes, cyclones. And so we know that there's already climate migration from the eastern seaboard of the United States. People are already starting to move to get away from the floods and the hurricanes, also on the in the Gulf State. And I even wonder how many people have potentially moved from BC because of the fires last year. And God knows people must be thinking of getting out of California, given what's happening there. So all this stuff it's not happening somewhere else, just happening somewhere else. It's definitely on our doorstep, and it's happened here too with the fire, that Fort McMurray fire, and of course the fires in BC affected all of Canada last summer. With 258 million people moving around, the International Organization for Migration wanted to know what people's attitudes were to immigration. And I just want to take a minute to take a look at this graph. The light blue bars indicate people who don't have an opinion. They don't think that much about immigration. The dark blue color indicates those people who are content with the present level of immigration coming to their country. The orangey pinky is the number of people, the percentage of people who want to see immigration decrease. They don't want so many people coming in. And the greeny one at the end indicates people who would like to see more people coming into their country. So there's just a couple of things I want to highlight here. I think you can see clearly where the various sections are, right? Or the various countries. The thing that kind of caught my attention was that North America didn't really look that different from the rest of the country, or the rest of the countries. And I was surprised, because when you hear that rhetoric coming out of the United States, I expected to see it be more anti-immigrant than other parts of the world. The only thing you can really say about North America is that we seem to be much more opinionated than others. Well, Oceania as well. But when you look at Europe, this is also very interesting. This is actually where you see the most anti-immigrant sentiment is in Europe, right? People are not happy they want fewer immigrants coming into their country. And that's interesting also, because Europe, not just Southern Europe, but all of Europe, you've got the very aging populations. So it's not clear where these people think they're going to get the workers that they're going to need 10, 20 years from now. Nonetheless, very anti-immigration, although that's not consistent throughout Europe. There's countries like Spain, for example, is actually quite welcoming of immigrants. So it depends on the country that you're looking at. But overall, and when we think of the mess that's going on right now, as we speak, actually, in England with Brexit, I guess this graph doesn't seem too surprising. The areas that voted in favor of Brexit were hardest hit by the economic downturn and were the most anti-immigrant. And England is also an interesting case because it had its own sort of self-imposed austerity. They didn't have to implement austerity. The European Union wasn't lending them any money or anything, but they took the opportunity. They were very opportunistic and thought, gee, we really like this. We like all that austerity that's happening in Southern Europe. I want to do that too. And so they've been very punishing in England, and there's some really terrible things happening there. And that, I think, is feeding into the anti-immigrant sentiment that we see. The areas that voted to stay in the EU were richer, they were more cosmopolitan, places like London, and actually had more newcomers, so people actually had more interaction with newcomers. When we go to Italy, this is a quote by Yanis Varoufakis, who is a Greek economist, and he was finance minister in Greece during the height of their crisis. And his quote says that austerity for the many and socialism for the bankers has given rise to the present fascist movement in Italy, and to the collapse of the political center everywhere, and to the reactionary divided Europe that Mr. Trump dreams of. I actually don't think Trump dreams of anything, but I do agree with the first part of what he's saying. So there's this connection between the austerity, the hardship, the financial crisis, the immigrants, and the rise, he says, the rise of fascism. Immigrants are being used as a scapegoat in other parts of Europe for sure. This was a very violent anti-immigrant demonstration in Chemnitz in Germany. These are neo-Nazis, and we've seen this kind of demonstration and this sort of reaction also in Poland, in Hungary, in Austria, in France. So it's popping up in Europe, and people are getting worried. The states, of course, we've heard all that, build that wall. It seems like not now that the Democrats have taken control of the House of Representatives. That whole, I've read that people think that's going to fall on its face. And then when you think back on the attitudes of the United States towards immigration, well, North America, I'm hopeful that this idea that there's that much anti-immigrant sentiment in the United States it's inflated, right? It's kind of like the NRA effect of just the noisy large minority. But nonetheless, this Honduran thing is fueling the fires, and this is a quote from a Honduran politician that the people coming up are not seeking the American dream; they're fleeing the Honduran nightmare. And the United States would do well to remember why Guatemala and Honduras are so violent and so poor. And a lot of it has got to do with American interference in that part of the world for many decades. And the World Bank estimates that about 4 million people from Central America are going to be migrating out of Central America in the next 30 years because of climate change. So not only is there extreme violence and danger, there's been extreme drought there, and the agricultural sector, certainly in Honduras, has been almost wiped out. So people can't find enough food. So it's a combination of events that are pushing people towards the United States. Now, in Canada, we tend to think that we're the nicest people on the planet, and we're very welcoming of immigrants. But this academic from University of Toronto, Michael Donnelly, did a study to try and gauge what Canadians' attitudes were towards immigrants. And he says that whatever is driving our exceptionally positive history of immigration and integration, it does not appear to be an exceptionally tolerant public. And in his study, he found that really Canadians' attitudes towards immigrants was not any different than other parts of the world. So maybe we shouldn't pat ourselves on the back quite as hard. This leads me then to think about the possibility or the growth, the growth of Canadian conservatism. I think it's happening. Most of you have probably seen this picture in Maclean's magazine. The boys in blue, right? I love the way they've got Kenny here, as if he were already the premier or something. That's kind of creepy. But the idea is, and Maclean's has done some pretty good coverage of what's going on. Like they did a story when Ford came here for the big rally in Calgary. What they seem to be able to, or what they're trying to get traction on anyways, is the carbon tax, right? And Pallister, that's the tall guy in the back there, in Manitoba, we had a plan for a carbon tax in Manitoba, but when Ford got rid of his, then Pallister said, oh, well, we can get rid of ours too. And of course, Saskatchewan is suing, right, over it. They're not going to do it, and it makes you wonder what Kenny's going to be up to. And Scheer is obviously against it. So that seems to be the clarion call for this crew. Also, we've got Ontario Proud, this organization which is vowing to take down the federal Liberals. They supported Doug Ford. They viciously attacked Kathleen Wynne in Ontario, and they're gearing up to get Andrew Scheer's Conservatives elected, and it makes you wonder if there's going to be some sort of a consolidation of Conservatives in Canada. You've also got this character, Maxime Bernier, from the People's Party of Canada. We haven't heard much from him. Hopefully we won't. But he's waiting out there in the wings, so if that anti-immigrant sort of xenophobic stuff starts heating up, I think he'll be the first one to jump in there. The only positive thing about him gaining some traction would be that he would, split the right for us. But at the same time, of course, we don't, at least speaking for myself, I would rather not see him. But as Conservatives consolidate provincially, I think that we can expect to see declining union rates. That was one of the first things that Brad Wall did when he got elected, was go after unions. It was the first thing that Brian Pallister did when he got elected was go after unions. And I don't know if specifically Ford has gone after unions, but he's going after the private sector, so it's the same difference. I think we'll see more climate change denial and attacks on the environment. I've read some of the stuff that Jason Kenney has tweeted and said about the climate. It's quite shocking, some of the stuff that he says, and Ford is just out there as well, obviously. I think we'll see growing inequality as minimum wage increases are pulled back. They have been in Ontario. They've been tagged to inflation in Manitoba, whereas the NDP were increasing them quite a bit more. I think we'll see an increase in precarity as conservatism sort of consolidates, and cuts in social services, especially healthcare and education. We're already seeing that in Manitoba for sure, big time in Manitoba, and it's also happened in Saskatchewan. And recently, with what's happening in Ontario, there's been some shocking things happening in Ontario just over the last couple of days. Announcements anyway, and an increase in privatization. And certainly in Manitoba, there's been some red flags floated around Manitoba Hydro that we're watching very carefully. So this is the good part. I get to talk about some nice stuff. Points of light. We can't, Trevor and I were talking about this in the car when he picked me up. We can't let ourselves get pulled too much into despair, right? We've got to look for some positive stuff, and I do think it's out there. You don't often talk about maybe China when you want to talk about happy things, but there's some interesting stuff happening in China, and they seem to be going after air pollution. This graph shows how air pollution levels in Beijing have come down in 2017. That red line shows how they've come down. And of course, they've got to do something. There's over 1 million people a year die in China because of air pollution. So they're really going after their coal plants and making a difference there. They're also the global leader in electronic vehicle sales. They subsidize EV manufacturers. They have tightened regulations around fossil fuel powered cars. So you get penalized if you drive a gas guzzler. You get rewarded if you drive an EV. And it's the leader in alternative energy, spends twice as much as the US on solar, provides the world with 2/3 of solar panels, and it's investing in wind, solar, and hydrogen. So I picked a lot of this information off a Bloomberg report, and I was wondering how much of it was hype. And then I happened to meet a couple of guys who go to China all the time. One of them is an environmental consultant, and he goes there to consult with the Chinese government. And I said, is it true, all this stuff that's happening in China? And he said, yeah, it's phenomenal what's happening in that country. They are like leapfrogging over us. And you go to cities and you see electric vehicles everywhere, and it's not even possible to drive a gas guzzler to the center of the town. They're investing in public transportation, metro, and et cetera. And the same thing's also happening, he claims, in South Korea. And when he talked to people about, government people about why they were doing this, it wasn't even necessarily for environmental reasons. They were doing it for economic reasons. They saw that that's the way the world economy is going. The writing is on the wall. And the other thing they said is they wanted to be self-sufficient. And they particularly did not want to have anything to do with the United States. So, well, because they're not reliable, right? You just never know what you're going to get with these guys. So I don't think it's hype, and I think other people have heard this stuff too. Now, the reason I want to bring up China, there's other countries we could talk about as well, but the reason I wanted to bring up China is because if it's true that they are innovating so much and moving so much in that direction, what's the story with bitumen and getting the bitumen over to that part of the world? I ask myself. If they are really going that alternative, is there really a market for for Alberta bitumen over there, or how long will there be a market for Alberta bitumen? So I noodled around a little bit, and I found some stuff. I've looked at this stuff before, actually. Jeff Rubin is an oil economist, and he said that an emission-constrained world is around the corner, let's hope, and only the lowest cost producers will remain viable. In case you haven't heard, Alberta bitumen is not a low-cost commodity, or whatever you want to call it. Global compliance with climate mitigation targets poses a lethal outlook for the future of the oil sands. And thinking of the pipeline, he says that we should recognize that overseas markets that could be reached by pipelines will bring oil sands producers lower, not higher prices for the bitumen than they already receive in the North American market. So it begs the question as to why we are so adamant to get this damn pipeline through. And I know there's going to be some interesting discussion around that in the conference. It's Ian Urquhart, for example, and Melville's going to be talking about pricing. So I'm really looking forward to hearing conversations around this. Ian, you've done some great work on this stuff as well. We also have to remember that there's other sort of countervailing forces. All this negative stuff that we've talked about isn't happening in a vacuum. There's other stuff going on. This fellow here is that Yanis Varoufakis, the Greek economist I mentioned, and of course Bernie Sanders, and they are going to be launching a progressive international in Europe, or maybe they already have. I know it was going to happen in November. So they're gathering forces and saying, you know, we've got to organize here on a very serious level. Bernie Sanders talks about how at a time of massive global wealth and income inequality, oligarchy, rising authoritarianism, and militarism, we need a progressive international movement to counter these threats. And I was reading recently, George Monbiot, the journalist for The Guardian, was talking about how it's the global oligarchy is what's really preventing any sort of a move from happening or improvement from happening around climate change. It's the stranglehold that the oligarchs have on the world economy that's really preventing any change that we need, certainly on the environmental front. This is, you know, once again, reiterating the urgency that the IPCC talked about how in the next few years are probably the most important in our history. So it's the stuff that Sanders is talking about has to include environmental movement. I know that we're going to be talking about, next up is going to be talking about the, international movements and how that works. And also I think there's going to be a talk on democratizing the environmental movement. So all kinds of stuff we're going to be talking about this weekend is going to fit into this. Varoufakis once again proposes a common council, draws out a blueprint for an international New Deal, a progressive New Bretton Woods. So the idea is, you know, we've done this before. Last century, there was a massive global effort to fight fascism, to rebuild Europe after the Second World War. If we can just get our act together, the world can actually do this, right? Oops. That's okay. Got it. And here's a question that I had as I'm putting this together. If we can come up with over $2 trillion to bail out private banks, and it's been at least $2 trillion, and we came up with it like that, right? Why can't we come up with, I don't know, $5, $10 trillion to bail out the environment, to bail out poor people, to help, to help our First Nations in our own country here, to help the Guatemalans, give them reparation for all the damage that we've done down there, so that 4 million of them don't have to migrate out of there. Give them hope, give them something to live on. And if we can do that for private banks, there's just no reason why we can't do it for something as important as the environment. So we have to be hopeful. Remember There's some amazing people out there working. This is the young Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, got elected in New York State, an avowed socialist, right? This guy, love him or hate him, he might even be prime minister by now. I don't know. Things are changing so fast in England, but you know, an avowed socialist who's extremely popular in England. And Bernie Sanders himself, extremely popular. And this, we have to remember this, a few days after that violent anti-immigrant demonstration in Germany, 240,000 people came out for an anti-racist demonstration that was much larger than the far right one. There was a concert. So we have to remember, I think there are far more good people than wrong-headed people. The problem is, how do we get this kind of energy to go just from the demonstration into some sort of political action? Because that's what we're not doing. In the U.S., the teachers are starting to organize in a really interesting way. They're pushing back in all kinds of states. And some of the more interesting stuff that's happening in labor is happening in the United States right now, hopefully rejuvenating the labor movement there. It almost seems like when things get really bad, people start organizing and start fighting back. So we do have to remember that there is some good stuff happening. So let's bring it down now to Alberta. I'll sort of start winding things up a little bit. As we've seen, we're in this new world that I don't, at least speaking for myself, we haven't come to grips with. I think if we're unable to shift the narrative back to the center, the sort of muted conservatism that we have in Canada could go rogue on us. If the NDP is able to hang on, that could be a sign, perhaps, that some of those points of light are starting to consolidate, at least on the social side. But if Kenny takes Alberta back to the good old days, we'll only see, I think, the boys in blue gaining strength. So I just played out a few scenarios. What happens to inequality if the NDP win? I think we should see improvements in this province in inequality. You've gone from having the lowest minimum wage in the country to one of the highest, right? Good work, right? There's some good stuff that's happened under this government for sure. We have to remember that. And there's been increases in corporate tax rate, increases in taxes for higher income earners. You got rid of the flat tax. But that even happened before they got elected, didn't it? Oh, okay, good. Oh, sorry. And you know, there's been investment in schools and hospitals as a result of the increases in taxes, right? So some positive things have happened with this government, and we certainly need to recognize that. What happens to the environment with an NDP win? I don't know. Maybe people have a better sense than I of whether she would join the boys in blue against the federal carbon tax backstop. No, she won't do that. Okay. She threatened to at one point, didn't she? She was really mad about something, and she said she was going to do that. I just remember her being mad. And as I understand it, these are some of the things that they've brought in about, like the coal phase out will continue, the residential subsidies will continue, plans to cut methane emissions will continue, and the large emitter program will continue. And as I understand, these are initiatives that they have brought in that have not been politically volatile. Is that a fair estimate? People are kind of accepting of these things. So obviously, if they win, you're going to see that continue. Now, what happens to income inequality if the Conservatives win? They can't really reduce the minimum wage, I don't think. I mean, that would be political suicide. But they can refuse to increase it to inflation, so they would probably let inflation eat it away. They could certainly cut taxes again, and I would be surprised if they didn't. Ford is doing it as we speak. Cut funding to social programs. I mean, that's just a staple for a Conservative government. They would certainly go back to strict balanced budgets, and I think the NDP has been somewhat more willing to run a bit of a deficit, just so that you could, keep things going in the on the social spending side of things. But this anti-deficit hysteria that's around the world, they're gonna go back to that. And Trevor and we were talking about how there's even less appetite to run a deficit in Alberta than other parts of the country, because you've never had to do it, or recently you haven't had to do it because of your extreme wealth. I don't know, could employment standards be lowered anymore? Yes, people are saying, oh, yes. And I think they could certainly go after private sector unions. And I don't know, could they privatize anything else? A lot's been privatized, but they could probably privatize more to do with healthcare and education. Police, is that the next one? Yeah. Anyway, so this is, the sort of stuff you could be looking forward to. What happens to the environment with a Conservative win? I think he would cancel the carbon tax, right? Your probably existing carbon tax, you'd see that go. As per Ford and Pallister, right? As I said, Pallister was all over a carbon tax until Ford canceled Ontario's, and then he said, oh, I want to do that too. Probably wouldn't touch those other programs that I mentioned, because as I understand, they're not, it's not that they're unpopular. But regardless of which party wins, I think this is the potential flashpoint that maybe ignites conflict in this country. There's a tremendous irony for me with having the son of the man who nearly tore the country apart with the national energy policy, now tearing the country apart by nationalizing a pipeline that nobody really wants or needs, and doing that in partnership with an NDP government. It's almost impossible for me to understand this. And for me, the pipeline represents the tremendous upheaval and sort of cognitive dissonance that the country is suffering from as we try to reconcile the need to have decent jobs with the need to cut greenhouse gases. And I know Angela's going to be talking about that in one of the sessions. I really hopefully will break out of this paralysis soon. We have to break out of this paralysis soon. And I'm going to leave you with one last thought, my last slide. Quote from my favorite economist, John Kenneth Galbraith, a famous quote of his, that the enemy of the conventional wisdom is not ideas, but the march of events. And the whole climate change debate, war, whatever you want to call it, is not going to be settled because somebody wins an argument or somebody wins a debate. Albertans aren't going to listen to somebody give a speech and then decide, oh yeah, now I get it. His point here is that momentous things happen that cause sort of a collective dropping of the penny. People get it. And I don't know what it's going to be. Hopefully it happens soon. I can't help but wonder if it's going to be a combination of events happening quickly. The fires last summer certainly caught the attention of a lot of people across the country. I mean, we had trouble breathing in Winnipeg from those fires, and it was hazy. And our crops did poorly. Crops in Manitoba did poorly because of fires in British Columbia. And we all know what's happening, of course, in California right now. So I think that's it for me. We'll no doubt have some very interesting discussion when the Next Up crowd talks about international movement, and when Gwendolyn talks about the democratization of the environmental movement. I hope I've set a useful stage for the rest of the conference, and that come Sunday we can all go home feeling a little better prepared to take on the monumental challenges that we all face. Remember, we're all points of light, and it's just a matter of us consolidating and come together. And this, I think, reiterates what Lewis said about how we're the ones we're waiting for, right? It's up to us. So thank you very much. Thank you again for inviting me, and I wish everybody a great conference.
we've got a few minutes here, and what I would like to do is take kind of a wide swath of questions here. You had your hand up there, so we'll start at the back here, and then over to the back here. We have runners.
Two.
Will be
Can I see the mic? Number two. Who's the other mic? Okay, you want to run to the back, please?
If I talk loud, can people hear me?
We need to record you.
You have to be recorded.
You need it for the video, though.
We're going to have to have a record.
Thanks. Hi, Lynn.
Hi, Ian.
That was really loud. I really appreciated your talk. The number of topics you were able to cover was truly impressive to me. So thank you so much for that and for coming. You mentioned that your provincial government is looking into possibly privatizing parts of, I think it's called Manitoba Hydro. I don't know
Yes.
the exact name of the public
Yep,
utility.
that's
Yeah, so I just wondered if you could talk a bit about what is the government doing, or what sorts of discourses are they putting out there about privatization and a public utility, just in case we have to face something like that in the future. We could get a sense of how a conservative government talks about these things.
They're very sneaky. Very, 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 very sneaky. The way, and we saw the same pattern when they privatized Manitoba Telephone Service, which was also a Crown corporation. And this is the template that they use, and we're starting to see it come out with hydro. Conservative government gets elected. They promise they will never privatize MTS. Then they start getting some studies done showing that there's problems with MTS. Then they promise they're never going to privatize. Then they start carving it out into different units and getting private companies to do that job. When people say, "What are you doing?" they say, "We're not privatizing." And then they order more studies. Then they wait till the next election. They make sure they get a majority, and then they privatize. And we see signs that could be happening under Manitoba Hydro, and they're taking advantage of some situations too. And I know Andrew, is Andrew here? Hi, Andrew. I've read your stuff on hydro development, and they're taking advantage of the, or they've made an uproar about the heavy capital expenditure on Kiosk and Bipole 3, which has put Manitoba Hydro into debt, more debt than it's had for quite a while. And the plan there was, of course, to have power for export, which has kind of fallen a bit by the wayside because of fracking and stuff. But it still actually isn't clear that this is not going to be viable, all these capital expenditures. This is going to take a few decades to catch up with it. So they're talking about what a fiasco the debt is with these expenditures. They're talking about what a mess that it's in, and they say, but we would never privatize it. But recently they carved out the demand side management part of Manitoba Hydro into its own separate Crown corporation. It wasn't clear why they did that. They've now hired Gordon Campbell, ex-premier of BC, who was premier when they privatized parts of BC Hydro, to do another study on the capital expenditure for Kiosk and Bipole. Kiosk is a big dam expenditure, capital project. And we've already had the Public Utility Board look at that. We've had the Boston Consulting Group. They paid millions of dollars to the Boston Consulting Group to do the same study. And now they're hiring for $2.5 million Gordon Campbell to come in and do yet another study to see if it was done properly. Gee, that's sort of coincidental. And we now have got a new, or they're hiring, they've hired a new CEO for Manitoba Hydro, who was a high-level employee of Accenture, which was the corporation that got some of the work when they carved out stuff from BC Hydro. She also worked for BC Hydro when Gordon Campbell was premier. So it just looks, it doesn't look good, right? It's just scary. When you see this stuff happening, it looks very scary. So those are the things that we're watching. We had I had an op-ed in the Winnipeg Free Press just pointing these things out, right? They would have a hard time doing it. I mean, people really like Manitoba Hydro. We've got the cheapest hydro in the country, right?
Ken, there was a hand in the back.
Hello, Jason Cormier, QP Local 38, Calgary Inside Workers. Just, I did work with Accenture at one time, so I know all about that. And I work in the utility industry here in Alberta, so I know about that. But my point was just another point of light, so to speak. I also sit on the QP Calgary District Labour Council. I'm also an executive on the Calgary District Labour Council. Shop steward and executive at large with my own local. But a point of light is a recent win for CUPE in the unionization of WestJet.
Yes, it's true. Yeah. Are you referring to the pilots? No.
No, this has to do with the flight attendants.
Oh, I didn't hear that.
But this was the third time, and this time was the charm, and we actually unionized them within the QP.
Congratulations, that's great news.
Any other hands to fall in flight? And again in front.
Yes, I can't help but think about the elephant in the room here, and maybe not so much in terms of the environmental question, but certainly about income inequality and good jobs and precarity, and that is AI and robotization, what ultimately is going to be impact that on almost all those sectors that you were reviewing today. Have you got some overview of that?
Well, you probably know more about this than I do, but I did do a column in the Monitor about it because I was reflecting on this as well. And there's a couple of sort of interesting opinions on this. Some people say that they don't think it's possible to really automize as much as they're saying that they will, because as long as you can have the precariat, low, really poorly treated, low-paid people who are going to do all this grunt work, why would you spend millions or billions of dollars investing in technology? It's cheaper, actually, just to keep using the cheap labor. But the other issue is too, I think, this idea that somehow we're all going to get rid of the grunt jobs, and there's just going to be the good jobs left, and it's going to be this sort of paradise. But I just don't see how this can possibly be, because you need to extract surplus labor from workers, and if you have a robot instead of a worker, it's not clear to me really how you're going to make that much profit. And plus, if you don't have people working, who the hell is going to buy the stuff that you're making? So I think there's a lot of hype over this.
Yeah, I would agree. Actually, the question of demand is the big thing here, because if you did roboticize a lot of these jobs, you still have to find a way to get money into people's hands. But I think the other thing about technology has always been kind of a contested place there. So it's not that the technology itself is necessarily bad, it's who controls it,
right.
who decides when it's going to be implemented, under what conditions, and who is actually going to benefit from it. And that's always been, going back to the Luddites, the question about technology.
Exactly.
Again, just down in front here.
Hi, Lynn. Thanks
Hi.
for your presentation.
My pleasure.
My name's Anna Johnson. I'm a registered nurse here in Edmonton. Do you have any recommendations for how we should be preparing our healthcare system to deal with the impacts of climate change?
Oh. Oh. Well, I mean, I don't know, that's a huge question, isn't
Our
it?
audience is not easy on.
I know, no, that's fine. No, I really appreciate the question. I really appreciate the question, particularly with the aging population, right? Because climate change can be so hard on me, for example. It's just the big bugaboo here. The big thing that's missing is resources. It's money. And the fact that we're not getting enough money from the feds is really at the heart of the problem. I mean, they used to fund 50%, right, of provinces' healthcare. What is it now? 15%, something like that. So we really have to turn to the feds on that. But I mean, the issues that are going to arise because of climate change are going to require resources to address them, whether it be air conditioning or more heating or whatever it is, and making I think a lot of education around people how people will deal with extreme weather. But without the resources, I don't know how we do that. And that the federal government has to come to the table on this. They have to.
Well, certainly time for a couple more questions.
Yeah, hi. There's no way in support of that psychopath that runs the country to the south of us. But I've always seen the left as being against free trade and globalization, which helps 1% for sure. I've always been concerned with American military hegemony in the world. And I'm wondering, how are we to understand Bush's, or not Bush, he was another guy.
It's hard to keep them straight, isn't it?
Yeah, Trump's emphasis on American isolation. Like, is it a good thing or is it not a good thing? Is it? I just don't understand it. Like, I don't understand it if he's talking really about pulling military out of south out of the southern part of that country over there. Anyway,
Oh,
my
South
mind is
Korea.
starting to go.
Yeah.
And he's also talking about lessening the amount of military worldwide. Is that a good thing? I don't know. So how to understand that?
Yeah, he's tricky, isn't he? Because lots of times he says things that theoretically we should like, but yet because he's saying them, we kind of go, "Ugh, that doesn't make sense." And I mean, this is, I think, the nature of a populist like him, is they can hit certain points that they know make sense to people, and the free trade thing is certainly one of them. The left has always talked about how free trade has eroded wages and working conditions in North America. If you look at the Rust Belt in the United States, that's certainly the case. And so when someone like Trump comes along and says he's going to make America great again, you can't blame people. You can't blame people for being attracted to that, because in that sense he's making sense. And I think that's actually one thing where the left has got to we've got to get down off our high horse and understand that people are hurting. And so yes, exactly. I mean, people are hurting, and when he what he's saying is right, but he's using that information in a real sort of dog whistle sort of way, isn't he? And he's not really providing us with a viable alternative. He's just using it as a way to get people riled up. So we've just got to be really careful with that. But that's what populists do. That's what Hitler did. That's what Mussolini did. They draw on certain things that make sense, but then they exploit them and use them for their own purposes. And I mean, he wouldn't have the capability of trying to figure out what to do about that. I mean, that's just he's not smart enough to really understand it, right? So I don't know. Does that? Yeah.
Hand just the back.
Hi, my name is Sadie Macklin. I've just I was reading through your bio here, and I'm going to go back to something that happened in our province back when the New Democrats first took government. One of the first pieces of legislation was Bill 6 on farm safety legislation, and I see that one of the things that you were focusing on was the plight of migrant farm workers. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering how, say, people outside of the province saw the debate or the rallies and the issues that were going on in this province around that legislation, and what has happened, how people outside of the province understand what has gone on in agriculture in Alberta under this government.
To be honest with you, I think it's mostly people like me who would be aware of that, or people in the labor movement. And you're probably not surprised to hear this, but when it comes to labor standards, Alberta is always sort of presented as the worst case scenario, right? Like, well, at least we're not as bad as Alberta. And I was thrilled when I saw that they were going to make those amendments for agricultural workers. But having said that, it's not enough to have that on the books. And I'll tell you why. In Manitoba, we've got better protection for agricultural workers, and they can actually organize in Manitoba. And at one point, the seasonal agricultural workers that come up mostly from Mexico to work on the farms, they did organize under UFCW. And there was a tremendous push to get them decertified. A push from the Mexican consulate, and a push also from the people who hired them, who employ these mostly men at this point. And within a year, they actually ended up decertifying. And when you talk to them sort of after the fact and behind the scenes, they will confess that they were pressured to decertify, and they were scared, that the Mexican government scared them. The Mexican consulate works very hard to tell them and to scare them away from unions and to tell them not to have it. So as much as we like to say, oh, we're more progressive in Manitoba because we have better legislation, like I said, it's not enough to have the legislation. You have to be able to enforce it, and you have to be able to help people get access to the legislation. So, I mean, people, of course, were obviously very happy when they saw that those changes were finally coming through for agriculture workers. But that's something that I would worry about losing again if the NDP loses. So. Is it, in your experience, has it been much better since the legislation came through, or?
In my experience, it's been a mixed bag. The legislation's there, but to see actual action on what it is. We haven't really seen a whole lot of ability to interact with the government or to get the information to and from the people that should be open to listening.
Yeah, it's often the enforcement. It's one thing to get it on the books, it's another thing to enforce it.
We'll take one last question just at the back there.
Hi, my name is Alan Hasselgren, and you had some figures about the kind of right-wing swing in a lot of the world. And I was wondering about, like, how tight are these percentages, and what kind of real democracy, as in, you hear about the stuff down in the States where the conservatives are trying to restrict the electorate. And I was just wondering, in general, is there some real hard numbers or about what is the real percentage of the electorate that actually votes, and what is the percentage of the electorate that is actually right?
Yeah, these are.
Say, for example, in Ontario, you have Ford.
Yeah.
What was his percent margin of victory and that kind of thing?
Super good question, and I'm going to have to rely on the people around me because I don't have all those figures in my head. Does anyone know what was the percentage turnout? 40 of those who turned out voted for him. The question about Europe, though, is an interesting one, and I'm sorry, I can't give you figures off the top of my head, but I know one of the things that I've been reading about, particularly in Germany, is with now, Merkel is retiring, and there is this ascendant, I can't remember what it's called, is it the AFD or some AFD in Germany? And it's not that big they don't have that much of a share, and what's happening, because they're much more prone to having coalition governments in Europe, is they're going to be probably part of a coalition government, but so are the Greens, right? So, hopefully that gets muted, and I think Hungary is maybe the bigger worry. There seems to be more of a push there in Hungary, but yeah, right now these are flashpoints that people are worried about, and whether this is actually going to be some sort of really resurgence of fascism it's way too early to be talking like that. But these are just very worrisome signs.
Yeah, the one thing I would add to that is the type of electoral system is really important here. So of course we have a first past the post, which quite often has, if extreme members can get into a party and that party gets elected, they carry more clout. Whereas in most of Europe, what you have is a system where you have to get at least 4% of the vote to get any kind of representation. And so you tend to have these weird kind of amalgams in coalitions, but certainly the extreme right in some of the countries, like I know for sure in Greece, it's small, but it's very vocal and also very violent. And I think that's the case in many parts of Europe. So, I want to again thank you so much for Lynne for this fabulous.
Thank you so much.
We have a small token of appreciation for the coming to cold Edmonton to leave balmy Manitoba.
That's right. That's right. Which is probably going to be freezing by the time I get back.
Well, finally, just to finish off here, I want, if you find yourself now inspired, and I hope you did, to come to the rest of the conference, it is not too late to register. Your registration will be discounted the cost of tonight's ticket. Please visit the table and lobby to register or buy tickets. Coffee and goodies will be on hand tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. And then we will kick off the day at 9 o'clock sharp with pollster and analyst Janet Brown. In closing, we continue providing events like this and doing the research we do. We need your support. There will be a few volunteers at the registration table to take your completed pledge forms. Finally, because we like to leave you on a really positive note, tomorrow the temperatures are going up to a balmy -3. We'll see you then.